Welcome back, everyone. This is Kat, and we're going to continue on with our Getting to Know Hue Block of the Month quilt. We've been working on Block 11, which is our Lone Star Center, and this segment is segment number 3 or part number 3. So I've split this whole center up into 3 sections. The first section we go over cutting and piecing our, then section 2 is piecing our strip sets that create our diamonds. And now when I left you at the end of section 2, I said I'd meet you back here to put together these 4 star points, 2 of our applique blocks, and a center setting triangle. So I hope that didn't confuse you, because we actually need double this, which I have under here. I have 1/2 of the center already together. So we basically are just going to put this section together and then repeat it for the other half of our center. And then we'll just have the 2 setting triangles on either side left when we put it all together. So I didn't want to confuse anybody because I had said we're only going to be putting together these units right here. So I've got my pieces laid out so that I can't sew the wrong ones together. And the first thing we're going to do is we are going to pick up 2 of our star points that are adjacent to each other. I don't care which 2 you do, but I would start at an edge and then do these 2 and then these 2. When we do this, we're going to take and just flip one over on the other. And we're going to be sewing this center seam right here between our 2 star points. And the only tricky thing, not tricky, but the only thing you need to take into consideration, we are going to be creating a Y seam. And this is the Y, the top of the Y, and we are actually sewing the stem of the Y. So we need to make room or accommodate for this, the bottom of our applique block. And to do that, I have marked from my edge of this long side, this side here, I've marked 1/4 of an inch from the end here down. And that is where I'm going to start sewing. I'm going to leave this here open so that we can insert the applique block. So all you have to do is measure your 1/4 of an inch from this edge, and we're going to sew to the point. Now, these seams here are not inverse seams. These are going the same direction, which is going to make our life really easy, because we can just line this up with our fingers, and we did press our seams open, so we should be able to lay those seams directly over one another and pin and sew right through those. So I am going to meet you over at the machine, and let's go ahead and sew this seam up. Okay, I'm ready to sew this, the stem of the Y, and the top of this is open to accept my applique block. Notice that when these are laying one on top of each other, they don't really line up over there. I'm not really worried about that right now. These units have a lot of bias going on, and all I'm concerned about right at the moment is to make sure all of these intersections line up and that this all stitches flat. So I'll show you my how I'm pinning these Forgot to lift that up to show you, but I'm going to stitch it first, and then when I'm done, I'll show you how I've got this pin. The other thing is, instead of setting up my machine for a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance like I normally would, because we're sewing a Y seam here, we have to lock our stitch here at the beginning. It's really important that we have a lock stitch here. So I just set up my machine. I moved my needle over to my 1/4 inch position, but I have the actual stitch set up as a lock stitch. So my machine's going to take a little micro stitch right where I wanted it to start, and it's locked, and then it's going to start stitching. Where's my stiletto? I don't know where my stiletto is here. I'm gonna go ahead and stitch this down. Remember, you're gonna stitch right through your pins. I'm gonna try and get my hand here without getting in the way of the camera here. Poke that under there. Keep these down as flat as we can. We have a little bit of easing to do here, if you can see this. So I'm just going to use my finger to kind of put a little bit of back pressure on that to flatten that out. And again, I'm going to sew right through my pins. Show you how I've got these pinned. Let's go under here. So this might be easier. There we go. So when I pin, these seams are 45 degrees. So when I pin these together, I'm going to pin through the seam allowance that is pressed open along the edge first, and then I'm going to pin perpendicular to my cut edge here, perpendicular. So that way, if I do happen to hit a pin, I'm not going to hurt my machine. I probably won't even break a needle. It'll just bend the pin because these pins are very, very forgiving. All right, let's see how we did on this one. See how our seams are angles came together. That one looks good. That looks good. That looks good. That looks good. All right, I'm really happy with the way that came out. So again, I'm going to go to the iron, and I'm going to press my seam allowances flat. I'm going to press them open and get ready to set the applique block. So I'll go ahead and press this, and I'll meet you right back here, and we'll get that applique block put in here. Okay, so here is the unit I just put together by sewing the stem of that Y, and I just love this Lone Star. I think the colors in here are just gorgeous. So you'll notice that our light blues connect, our medium blues connect, our dark blues connect, and then our dark green connects. And then from there on out, the colors will start doing their own thing. Now we want to set the bottom of our applique block here. And what I do is I usually lay it out first to make sure I get it sewn in there correctly. But before I do that, I'm going to mark the bottom of my applique block. So all I did was I took a nice little ruler, small ruler, and I placed it, try and get this so you can see, I placed at the tip of it at 1/4 of an inch from either edge. So 1/4 of an inch from this edge, 1/4 of an inch from this edge, and I drew a little box. So now I have my 1/4 of an inch mark for this side and my 1/4 of an inch from the edge for this side. So once I lay it in here, I need to sew this seam and this seam, but we can only do one at a time. So pick a side. Doesn't matter which side, just pick a side. So what I do is I take my block and lay it down on one side. So I am going to start with this side of my Y seam. And when I do, I'm going to pick this up. So what I've done is I've laid them right sides together. I'm going to pick this up, and it doesn't matter if your applique block's on top or if your star block is on top, although I think I prefer it with the star on block, and here's why. On top, excuse me. Here's our Y, here is the 1/4 of an inch part of our seam that is not sewn together. So I am going to just fold back and get out of my way the side that I'm not sewing. So you want to make sure you don't actually sew it in. And I'm going to line this up with this side. And actually I marked my block on the other side. So if you want to sew from this side, which I'm going to do, and I'm going to just take my 1/4 of an inch from here. I'm going to make a little mark right there. We're going to pin this. So this little bit right here, we're just going to get out of the way. We're not going to do anything with it. And if I want to sew on this side, I'm going to just make my little 1/4 of an inch mark. Now, this side, we have nothing that we have to line our diagonal seam to, which is great. So we're just going to carefully pin this down, making sure you're not stretching anything, because we really have no way of telling how far this should come down on our applique block. What we do know, though, is that our applique block is going to be larger than our pieced star point. And it was my experience that I had approximately a 1/2 an inch left unsewn on the top of my applique block. So now we're going to come in here and we're going to sew this seam. Again, we're going to just ignore this. You can just fold it back out of the way. And using your 1/4 of an inch again. And starting at your marked line. You're not going to start at the edge. You're going to start at your marked line again. Get that lined up. Let's see where I'm going to make my mark just a little bit darker so I can see. That looks good. And again, my machine is going to take it's going to do a lock stitch. Okay, there's half of our seam. Now I'm going to take and fold this half back and line up our edges. And again, I think I'm going to work from this side. And there lines up perfect. Do you see that? So we started stitching on this side 1/4 inch, and I'm going to start stitching on this side 1/4 inch. I'm going to mark this, and I can feel where that ends. Stick a few pins in here, and this time I'm going to stitch from the bottom to my Y seam. Let's see if we end up with our 1/2 inch. We've ended up with just a smidge, about 1/8 of an inch less, but it's pretty close. So when we get down here, I am going to put one more pin here where we're going to end. I like to mark that with a pin so I don't stitch in to my other fabric. And now we're going to start at the bottom at my point, and we'll go ahead and stitch forward. I lost my thread. There we go. It's annoying when that happens, but when you have a needle threader like I do on this machine, it makes quick work. Just keeping those seam allowances that want to fly up, keeping them flat. So I'm getting up here to the edge, and I wish I could. I'm going to try and get this a little closer for you so you can see. So bear with me. I'm going to try and stitch this through and hit my lock stitch too. So right about where my pin is, I have a mark. So here, I just did my lock stitch. And let me show you now when I pull this out. Let's see if I can get my camera up here. So I'm 1/4 inch from this edge here. So let me stand this back up and let's take a peek. Y seams really aren't that difficult. You just have to make sure you start and stop 1/4 inch from the end. So let's take a look. Now I think in the book they tell you to press the seam allowances up. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to press them down because they naturally want to come down. Now I'm going to go to the iron and I'm going to press this out flat so this lays flat, and we'll take a look at this and then get ready for the next step. Okay, here's the unit that we just sewed. Try and give you a bird's eye view here with our Y seam here. And everything looks great. I'm going to lay it out. There we go. So I have one of these. We have one of these done. So I'm going to go ahead and jump over and put the next two star points together and insert my last applique block. And then I'll show you how to put that setting triangle that goes right in between them. We'll put that in, and then we'll put the whole thing together because I already have this half together already. So I'll go ahead and do these two and that applique block, and I'll meet you right back here. Okay, so all 4 star points are sewn together. I have my applique block on this edge, another applique block down here at this end of this Y seam, and so now we're going to set this setting triangle right here in the middle. But I want you to notice that where our, I'm trying to tip this up a little bit more, where our applique blocks meet our star points, we have extra fabric here, and that's okay. We're going to leave it here for right now. When we get done, Nancy wants us to trim around the entire center of our Lone Star, and so we are going to be trimming it up, but we're not going to trim anything until we get this setting triangle in here and we get the rest of it put together. So again, I've sewn this center seam and I've left my 1/4 inch unsewn at the edge with a lock stitch. And again, just like we did on the applique blocks, I've marked a 1/4 inch from each outside edge. Even though this is a 90. Okay, so we can only sew one side at a time, so I'm going to flip it over, and this time, since I marked on this side, I'm going to go ahead and pick it up and pin it together here. So I'm just going to flip this front down here and get it out of my way, bring this around forward, and this is where the edge of my pieced star point is. So I'm going to line up the point of my setting triangle right with the edge of that star point, section. And I'm going to pin all along here. And I want to show you when we get down here, just be careful you don't pull. We really don't have any registration marks or any seams that tell us where we should be pinning these together. So we're just going to be careful and not stretch. So when I get to the end where this is this funny little corner here, I've got all of this extra here. I'm just going to bring this out. I'm going to continue pinning right here along this edge, and I'm going to put one more pin here. So when I come in to sew, I'm going to stitch this my 1/4 inch all the way along here, and I could, if you want to, you can trim that little corner off just so it doesn't annoy you, and you know that you're going to just be stitching your 1/4 inch from the top. So let's go ahead and stitch this up. See if I can get my camera over here. And I'm just gonna get this out of my way. This leading edge here. There we go. Get everything lined up here. And drop your foot right on our 1/4 inch mark. I wonder if it'll help if I just trying to make this better for you. There, I think that looks a little clearer. You can't see my mark, but it's there, and I'm stitching right on my mark, 1/4 inch in from that leading edge. Notice I'm just stitching right over my pins. And this is where that funny edge is here. So I'm just going to continue till I sew off. So this is one side of our setting triangle, and then we'll just flip it and do the other side. Let me just show you here what this looks like. So here's our leading edge. That is unsewn, but it is locked. Now I'm going to grab this side and bring it around this way. And we'll line this up and pin it. I'm going to just bring it around the opposite direction. Show you what this looks like. So you're going to fold the side you just sewed. You're going to fold that leading edge down to expose the end of my setting triangle. Now I'm going to bring my next side, the second side, I'm going to bring up and into position. And this should go right into position here. And then I'm going to put a pin right there. And we're going to go ahead and pin this down. I am going to go get my phone charger because it's telling me I have low battery. And after all the technical difficulties I had at the beginning of this block, I do not want to go there again. Super frustrating. And we'll get this lined up here and straight across. All right, I'll sew this and I'll meet you right back here. Okay, I'm going to try and hold my phone up here while I show you that I now have both halves put together, and it's looking fabulous. So now we have our two halves. We have a setting triangle up here. If you can, where's my finger? There it is, over there. And then a setting triangle here that we've got to put together. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sew this center seam all the way across here. I'm going to start and stop 1/4 of an inch and lock those stitches just like we've been doing on the stems of these Y seams here. And I'm going to pay particular attention to make sure that my center star, which I'm really happy with, lines up nicely, and that I'm going to pin every single intersection where my 45-degree angles meet. So I am going to go ahead and get that pinned and sewn up, and I'll meet you back here. So here is that center seam that I just put together. So my setting triangle is going to go down here and down here. But I want to, I just want to encourage you, if you haven't decided whether you're going to do the traditional Lone Star like we've done here, or if you're going to do the other versions, don't be afraid to try this. I think this is my first traditional true Lone Star I've ever done. I know I've sewn inverse seams before, but I'm not sure I've actually done a Lone Star. And I have to say that although there's a lot of pinning, it's really not extremely difficult. The one thing I would say is you have to be very meticulous at your pressing. I think pressing is the key to getting this center to come out as nice as this one has. I'm really happy with it. But I don't think it would have been as successful had I not been pressing as carefully and at each stage as I did. So make sure that you get that iron out and you're using it properly for this particular section. All right, I'm going to put my other last 2 setting triangles in, and then we'll take a look at the whole block. And here is the completed center. Pretty stunning. Now we need to trim this up to, I believe it's 48.5 by 48.5. So I'm going to meet you back in at the cutting table and let's figure this out together. Okay, I'm back, and what I discovered was when I put a tape measure on my center block, I'm coming up with approximately 48 inches across in most instances. So what that tells me is possibly I need to repress my entire block from the front. Because of all these bias edges, even though we've pressed really well, that there is a little bit of room for movement here on our bias edges. So I'm going to repress. In the meantime, what I think I'm going to have to do, this is why I'm doing the video, and you're watching it before you put yours together, is remember when I said just go ahead and sew this down, we have extra here that we'll probably trim off. Well, apparently we don't have, these are supposed to match up because I don't have any extra. And so in order to get my 48 or 48.5, I have to measure out from this edge to the opposite side, which means this cannot stay this way. So I'm going to have to undo this seam here, and I am going to have to line these edges up, and I'm going to have to restitch this, which is not a problem because we have all these bias edges, so it should work out nicely. This side over here, I just had a little bit extra here, so I will take and redo this one. This side I had quite a bit. Remember, we measured it, and I said I had about a 1/2 inch. But then down here, I've got a side that matches up perfectly. And this one's only off just a little bit. So, in hindsight, we should have been paying attention to the ends here and making these. And these are our setting. These are just our setting triangles on the outside edge. So when you sew your setting triangles in, I would do what we did, pin from that Y point right here from our 1/4 inch in, and then I would jump down here and I would pin these and make sure that these line up. And then I would go ahead and pin in the interior and just make sure that you're easing in all the way along this edge here. All right. Well, I've got a little unsewing to do and then some resewing, and then I think I'm going to be in good shape. So this will conclude part 3 of block 11. I will do a short video for the other 2 center stars, and then we'll continue on with our last block, block 12, which is going to be our zigzag border. And then we'll put it all together. So I'll meet you back here for that. Thanks.